Roth conversions, when to do them, when to not. That's our conversation today on Friends Talk Financial Planning. I'm Bridget Sullivan-Mermel. I've got a fee-only financial planning practice in Chicago, Illinois.
And I'm John Shear. I've got a fee-only financial planning practice in Middleton, Wisconsin. And before we dig into the question of to convert or not to convert, I want to remind everybody to hit that subscribe button, help other people find this information on YouTube. And with that, I'm looking forward to jumping in, but I think this could be a pretty quick conversation, when to do it or when not to. Always do it, and then we can stop the conversation, right? Just do the Roth conversions.
I don't think it's that easy. There is an easy part, and that is when you're young and you think you're going to be making more later, but you happen to be in a low-income situation that year. So lost a job, between jobs, just your income happens to be low that year, but you think, I'm going to be cranking it up again, taking a year off, taking a professional gap year, sabbatical, whatever, unpaid. Those are good years to think about it, because the Roth conversion strategies, in my opinion, hinge on I'm in a lower tax bracket now, and I'm going to be in a higher tax bracket later. I call it tax bracket arbitrage, but that's getting a little fancy. But anyway, so that gap, because I'm in a low bracket now, I'm going to be in a higher bracket later. That's a great year. And so when you're young, you're maybe not positive you're going to be in a higher tax bracket later. But I know, for instance, when I started my first business, I did this. I was like, well, so I'm starting a business. I'm not making a lot, but I have some money in the bank.
Right.
So let me do some Roth conversions. So
hey, let's jump in. I love you calling the jargon police on yourself with talking about arbitrage. That is a very sexy word to use at a cocktail party when you talk about using tax arbitrage. Pull that one out, even if people don't know what you're talking about. It sounds good. But I just let's just make sure that people know what we're talking about. And again, if you're a longtime viewer, you've seen these sort of topics before. But what we're talking about is saying, listen, I've got money inside of a regular IRA. I took a tax deduction for putting money in my 401k or 403b or IRA. Now I'm going to choose to take that money out, take a distribution, and put it into a Roth IRA. And when I do that, there's no 10% penalty for taking it out early, but I have to pay taxes on all that money. So if I have $100,000 in a in a regular IRA, and I convert that to a Roth IRA, on my tax return for this year, it'll look like I made $100,000 of taxable income, but then it goes into the Roth IRA. And just to be really clear, like that's what we're talking about in the question. I love how you framed it, Bridget, as in using tax arbitrage, right? But saying, listen, if I can pay taxes on that $100,000 at this level, and in the future, my tax bracket's going to be at this level, I might want to pay taxes here, so I don't pay taxes here in the future, right? That's sort of the deal.
Yeah, and I really like it if you're in the 12% or 10% bracket, more so than if you're in the higher brackets, because you can tell that there's a pretty big leap. So right now, the tax bracket goes from 12% to 22%. And I've been in the business for decades, and I can say there's generally a leap. The exact numbers change, but between, it's 10, 12, and then 22. That's hot. That's 10%. That's worth playing around with.
Yeah. And I really appreciate, I tend more of our clients are closer to retirement, in retirement. So I really appreciate that idea of, hey, when I'm starting, I'm younger in my career and I'm in between jobs. And I say this all the time to friends and things like, listen, you lose your job, something happens. When else do you have time to kick back and enjoy it for a little bit? There's nothing wrong with taking 6 months off and not sweating the thing, right? But when you're in that spot, now I've got a lower tax bracket, that can be the time to do that, because I know I'm going back to work next year at some point. That sort of thought process, I think, is really an awesome way to think about it. Typically, when we're talking about Roth conversions, it's people as they're approaching probably in retirement, and now they can choose to make taxes voluntary or not, right? I have more flexibility, and I don't necessarily have to do anything from a tax standpoint, but I could. How do I think about that? And one of the big things for us in thinking about this, and Bridget, you go back a long time in this world, that, when these Roth IRAs first came out in the late 90s, then the Roth conversions came out, there's a lot of talk in our world professionally. Bridget and I go to conferences and these sort of things. And a lot of the talk is everybody should do Roth conversions. You should convert all this to Roth because look at all this tax-free money you have. And Bridget's making that grumpy face at me here, right? But that's the thing. And I'll tell you that for many years, I said, well, we'll kind of see, right? I call it the bird in hand theory. I know the taxes that I pay today. I don't know the taxes I'm going to pay tomorrow. How do I think about that? I'm not convinced that we should all convert everything that we have in IRAs to Roth. But in the last 5 to 10 years, there have been some significant tax law changes that have made me think a little bit differently about that. And one of them is that tax rates have gone down and then they've gone down again. I keep on saying I think taxes will go up, but golly, they keep going down. Maybe they keep going down. I don't know. But, geez, we're in a pretty low tax rate environment, at least I think. But then the other big one for me is that these inheritance rules, and we did a recent episode on inheriting an IRA, but it used to be that a 40-year-old person inherits an IRA, they can stretch out the distributions over the course of their lifetime. And when somebody is 40, they've got 20 or 30 or 40 years to spread out that tax hit. Now the rules say when somebody dies, I inherit an IRA, I've got 10 years to take all that pre-tax money out. And if there's $1 million, you do it real simply in your head. It's $100,000 a year of extra income coming in that I have no choice on when to take. So lower tax rates for me and this compressed time frame. We can't spread that that inherited IRA out. Leads me to say, hey, doing a Roth conversion and putting more money where all the future growth is going to be tax free has appeal. It's not, and we can get into this discussion about what's the right thing exactly to do. For me, I don't know exactly, but there's less downsides in my mind.
So if you're in the luxurious position of being able to do estate planning, that means that, you've got some money. I call this tidying up your estate. So you're thinking about, how would my heirs like to do this? Would they like to stretch it out just over 10 years, or would they like to get this tax free? The first question I have before people do this is, do you have enough money? Like, are you going to run out of money? So if you know you're not going to run out of money, then I start thinking about like, okay, does this make sense? Because if you might run out of money, there's like at the end of your life, you might pay very little or low taxes just because you might have high medical expenses or a variety of other things. So I am not, again, if I'm sure you got more money than you're going to spend, then I think Roth conversions. So that's and tidying up the estate.
Yeah, and you had mentioned
Either
you had,
it's not like I have to do all of mine. You can do smaller amounts.
yeah, you had mentioned before this again. I'll go back to that idea of arbitrage. We're saying, hey, am I going to be in a lower tax bracket or a higher tax bracket? And I wanted to point out to viewers that if you're in the same tax bracket all the way along, and then when your kids inherit the money, they're in the same tax bracket, this stuff doesn't make any difference from right? It is literally 6 of one, half a dozen. You pay the same amount of taxes. It all works out. I've done the math, right? It's when there are changes in tax brackets. So what's the risk? I do a Roth conversion now at my tax bracket, 22%, whatever number it is. And at some point in the future, I'm in a lower tax bracket. As Bridget, as you just said, I got, long-term care costs in a nursing home. My tax bracket goes way down probably. My kids have an occupation where their tax bracket's way down. I've paid taxes at this level and I could have taken it out at this level way down the road, right? That's the risk. The advantage is I pay taxes at this level, and in the future, my taxes or my kids' taxes are at this higher level, right? And I know that you and I, Bridget, think about this in terms of, well, here's the tax law today, and let's operate under that methodology, which I think is the right way to do it. But there are people that say, geez, tax rates have to go up. As I said before, I've been saying that eventually I'll be right, like a broken clock, right? Eventually I'll say, yeah, tax rates have to go up. But it can be one of these things for folks where if you go, listen, what's the downside? Well, if somebody's in a lower tax bracket in the future, then I'm not making a great decision by doing the conversion today. What are the chances of that? Not zero, but for many of our folks that we work with, they say, well, there's not much of a chance, but it's what my kids do for a living, those sorts of things. And then what are the chances that taxes go higher in the future? And some people go, oh, golly, they're going to raise taxes. Yeah, like I said, I tend to think so, but we'll find out. So it can be one of these things where if there's only a little bit of downside, only if somebody's in a lower bracket, and geez, I'm really afraid of higher tax rates in the future. I don't think you should mortgage your future based on what you think might maybe happen down the road, especially based on politicians. At the same time, if you go, listen, it doesn't hurt us on one side, and maybe it gives us some gain. I don't know if it does or not, but maybe there's some upside. Having some diversification from a tax standpoint, right? We all talk about having a little bit of your investment pie in different buckets, right? Stocks and bonds and all those sorts of things. From a tax standpoint, if I can do that and not have much in the way of downside, that's where I think it can be appealing for folks.
Okay, so we've talked about when you're first starting out, and we're talking about the other end of the spectrum, the people that are trying to tidy up their estate. So they're on the older end of the spectrum and they're thinking about, okay, what is this going to be like for my heirs? But then I also think there's another group too with Roth conversions, and that is people who have retired. So they don't have this big income train coming through with their wages. But they haven't started taking Social Security yet, or required minimum distributions from their RMD, from their IRAs. So they can have a few years where they might say, well, geez, like I'm paying zero tax. And I'm like, I celebrate when people are paying 12% tax,
Yeah.
not when they're paying zero tax. So we move them up a little bit to convert some, and then they pay 12% on that, especially when we know they're going to be in the 22 or 24% bracket later.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks so much for pointing that out. And think about this, right? When I'm working, I'm in the 24% bracket, let's say. Now I'm living off cash in the bank or different things, right? I got zero taxes. But in 2 or 3 or 4 years, when I have to start taking money out of my IRAs to live off of, I'm going to be back in the 24% bracket, right? That's exactly what you described. I don't want to see you paying zero. Let's pay some taxes at 12 instead of 24, right? That's a great middle ground here. There, a really important point to bring out. And I think that's maybe a great place to wrap things up and close on this discussion of Roth conversions. Again, I'm John Shear. I own the Fee Only Financial Planning Practice in Middleton, Wisconsin.
Sullivan Mermel. I've got a family financial planning practice in Chicago, Illinois. John and I are both accepting new clients, but we're also members of a nationwide organization, ACP, or the Alliance of Comprehensive Planners. So if you're looking for an advisor in your area, you can check out acplanners.org.
And don't forget, hit that subscribe button.